Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Uh, we are going to be discussing midlife when she stops disappearing. And I am here um, and I'm being joined. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Linda.
Okay, I'm Linda Cooper, and I write about the midlife transition of perimenopause, menopause, and how it affects relationships, having lived through it and experienced it, and on the other side of it.
Awesome. And I'm Simon Salt. I write at The Quiet Transition. I'm a certified menopause coach, and I write as a translator for men to better understand the menopause transition and so they can show up better. So I had a question for you to start us off, looking at my notes. Um, Before this becomes visible to a partner, what's already been building internally that often hasn't been discussed?
That's a very good question. Good place to start. There's a lot that's happening beneath the surface for a woman that she's really not even recognizing at this point either, or having a name for what it is. She's feeling very unsettled, not quite like herself. She's having more reactionary responses to things. There's a sense of things needing to change, but not yet knowing what that even is. And almost like an abruptness that wasn't there before in her thought process and in her perceptions as well. So, she might start to look at her husband differently and not even understand, okay, what is that all about? And a lot of times what we do is we externalize that as, if I'll use myself as the example. Oh, I'm not sure I like you anymore. You're bothering me. And then there's questioning of, okay, I'm reaching this midpoint in my life and I'm feeling this angst and unsettledness, and I don't think I'm happy within myself or the relationship. And what does this all mean? So it really starts to percolate inside as a feeling, first of all.
Hmm.
Then it starts to, as the woman sits with it and experiences more, we're trying to figure out, well, okay, what does this mean and the implications of all this, which is a very scary place to be in, because what does this mean? If I'm not happy and I'm not happy in my relationship, or there's a perception of that, now what does that mean?
Hmm.
So it becomes very big. And so she's carrying all this around with her internally, having this internal dialogue. And maybe or maybe not, maybe there's just this huge feeling of, I'm going to explode and I don't understand why. And she hasn't articulated this yet to her husband because she's trying to figure it out for herself first.
Right. And I think it was really interesting you talked about women externalizing some of these feelings and the conflict within themselves. And I think the receiving end of that for men is to internalize it because we're not very good at externalizing our feelings and we're taught not to. We're enculturated to tamp those down. So we internalize these things. And we were talking earlier, the situation I went through when we started to experience these changes in the relationship. And um, the doctors were basically telling my wife there was nothing wrong with her. But she was feeling these changes internally and was externalizing them. And so the response from a man is, well, it must be me.
Right. And you take that on because, okay, the woman's, your labs are coming back fine, but now I'm having a lot of these reactions towards me. So it must be me. And for men, I believe it's like, how can I fix this? There's a problem
Mm,
here. How can I fix this?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's one of the things is men, as they start to realize there's something changing, then there must be a solution because we're solution providers. We, as you said, we fix things. So I think that that's important to recognize that that mindset that men come to with these things isn't appropriate necessarily for that situation because nothing's broken.
Right.
so you can't fix it. So that can lead to a struggle internally for men. Well, what's my role in all of this then? If I can't fix this, if there's no clear solution. And like you said, this is long before language has developed, long before the words like perimenopause and hormones are taking place within the conversation, internally with the woman, externally with her medical providers, externally with her partner. Without any of that happening, then where do they go? Where does that relationship go?
Right. And so you're left feeling lost, both of you feeling lost for various reasons, with no real understanding or language that's happening out there for what you're exactly experiencing. Because the man is looking at it from the perspective of, oh, something's happening to my wife, something's happening to my partner, being solution oriented. How do we fix this? What can we do? But nothing is named on what it is yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're both swirling in your own assumptions and fears about what's happening with no language for what is exactly happening. And the man is looking at it he's looking at his partner going, I want to help. But at the same time, again, we don't have the language around this right now, is he's also in this transition as well. And the
Mm-hmm.
relationship is going to be a part of this transformation. But we have no idea. I had no idea when I was going through it what I was in. And it would have really been helpful to have known.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that knowing for both of them, for
Mhm.
both partners, is a huge piece. And before that happens, before you actually know what's going on, then, like you say, there's this constant wondering, this constant assumption, and unfortunately, for a lot of couples, it produces that distance. People start to drift
Yeah.
because this uncertainty causes the drift. And like you said, for some women, not all, but for some women, they start to look at their partner and be, I don't like you anymore, or you're breathing different, or, you put the toothpaste back in the wrong place constantly. Why are you doing that? And for the man, this is, why is this coming up now? You've never mentioned any of this before. So what's going on, And I think, and we've talked about this, and other people have talked about this, perimenopause doesn't cause the cracks necessarily. It reveals them.
Yes, exactly. And so, if you have had a relationship where there's been open communication, there's a safety built within the relationship where the man feels free to speak his truth, and so does the woman, that can really help. If there has been maybe resentments along the way, or the woman hasn't spoken up and said, you know, I'm not happy about this, or, there hasn't been that dialogue, that's when the cracks start to show in the perimenopause, because that buffer that the woman had physiologically has now dropped away.
Hmm.
And the truth comes out, which is actually a good thing, although it doesn't feel like a good thing.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you're very right there. And I think some women don't bring those things up for a safety reason, exactly as you said. It's not a safe space for whatever reason.
Mm,
And there can be a lot of things that determine what designs a safe space. I mean, it's different for every couple, it's different for every woman and every man as to where they feel comfort in speaking and speaking up. And
right.
for some men, being absolutely honest, for some men, they don't actually want that safe space. They don't find the need to speak up. They go along to get along.
Mhm.
And for some women, they just don't feel safe. They wonder about what the relationship would look like if they made those conversations, if they made those statements. So they continue to carry the load.
Yeah, that's true. And then for the woman, depending when she's experiencing this, what are the implications of saying her truth? What does that mean? Is this going to break the relationship apart? Well, what does that mean? What does that mean emotionally, financially, what does it mean for
Mhm.
children? Like there's so much that is packed in there. So it doesn't become an easy, because some people will say, well, why don't you just say what you're feeling? Well, there's a whole psychological and emotional layer under that that also has to be taken into consideration. And I know for myself, I wasn't having those conversations. Um, my what is it? Attachment
Mhm.
was avoidant.
Ah,
My husband's was anxious, so he wanted to lean in and what's going on here, and I'm like, I can't. Like I no, my nervous system didn't want to go there. So you have these two different attachment styles also bumping up against each other as well.
mhm.
So it's very complex.
I totally recognize that because my wife and I are exactly the same. Hers is avoidant, I'm anxious, and like you say, I want to lean in and help fix this. I don't want the relationship to dissolve, and her reaction is to step back and try and deal with this on her own first. And I think that's something that men have to recognize is that it's not necessarily that the woman doesn't want to involve the man, she doesn't understand enough about what's going on to be able to involve the man. Um, and I think that's a big thing as well, that men have to recognize that this takes time, even if they're recognizing things. And quite often, men do recognize symptoms before the woman does, sleeplessness, mood swings, things like that, that they're noticing because they're on the other end of them, that the woman necessarily hasn't recognized as being issues yet. They know these things. They know they're waking up at 3 a.m. and staring at the ceiling. They recognize that maybe they're a little bit shorter and sharper than they used to be, but they don't have language. They don't have reasons for this.
Right. Yeah. The connections aren't being made that this is physiological, like it's biological, hormonal, psychological, emotional, it's all of those things. And I think that's why it's really important to have these discussions so that men
Mhm.
and women know, okay, this is what's happening. Okay, now we can understand and we can try to move through this together.
Yeah. And I think that that's the big thing is once they start to become a partnership, and I think that's the biggest step for a lot of men to move from the helper fixer role into the true partner role, even though they feel that they've been a partner all this time. And it's when we come back to those cracks that appear and this question of why have you never said anything? And sometimes that realization that these cracks are there can come as quite a shock to the man. I thought everything was fine. Everything happened on a daily basis. Everything had a routine and a rhythm to it, which has now been completely upended. This rhythm doesn't exist. Or if it does, it stop starts and it has a new overlay to it
Mhm.
that this rhythm can't just carry on like it used to. And I think everybody wants normality. Everybody wants things to stay as they were, and they don't want these disruptions. I think that's a perfectly human response. But that doesn't happen. Things have to change.
Yeah, and this the woman's biology forces this change, whether
Hmm.
we're ready or not, whether we want to or not. It's something that is triggered, and if it can be seen as from the perspective of this is something happening for us, for this relationship, and not that she's not going to go back to who she was.
Hmm. Yeah,
She's not even biologically able to go back to who she was and emotionally.
right,
So it's like, okay, where are we moving towards? How are we going to move through this? Because she's changing, therefore the world around her is changing, and how the husband interacts with that can make a big difference for both of them, himself
right.
included, right?
Yeah. And I think there's that level of admittance as well, because there's so much societal pressure, there's so much societal imagery around aging, around women reaching perimenopause.
Yeah.
And depending on the age of the woman, this can happen in the mid to late 30s, can happen mid 40s, can even happen late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, there comes this biological marker that you've aged.
Yes.
And I think for men as well, when their partner gets that signal, you've aged, that implicitly is the same signal to them. They've aged. And that can be a shock. That can be a real realization that no, I haven't aged. I'm still who I was. I'm still as active. I'm still as um, the same as I used to be. But now you're telling me we, and in particular me, have aged. And now I have to take on a different personality. And I think one of the big problems that men face is this loss of identity.
Yes. And, we're focusing on kind of the woman's kind of biological entry into this, but the man has his own set of things, issues he's dealing with. Yes,
Mhm.
aging, what that looks like, moving towards retirement. Men are very identified with their job and that role. And as you get closer to that time of retirement, there's a real fundamental shift that's going to happen. And I would say, the woman who's has the bigger shift or big shift with the menopause, the man has equivalent, especially at retirement for the man,
Mhm.
the lack of identity. And the other thing as well with this time of life is it's not just perimenopause, menopause that's happening. We're moving into a stage of life where empty nest, children are leaving the nest. Our parents are aging. We're having to now take on roles that we didn't have before in caretaking, or our parents are passing away. There could be financial issues that are coming up as you move closer to retirement. There's so much that's converging for
Mhm.
both in the
Yeah.
couple this time of life.
Yeah, that sandwich generation, like you're talking about, where they become empty nesters, they take on responsibility for parents, all of which increase the emotional load that the woman typically is under. And, depending on the man, they may take on more of that. But certainly for women, that's increasing the emotional load
Mm.
at a time when their tolerance for taking on increased emotional load is reducing because of fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone and affecting brain chemistry. So that's a struggle, I think, um, that women have to, and the partners have to recognize that this isn't something that just can be taken on.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And I think what women are looking for is who's taking care of me while I'm taking care of everyone else and everything
Mm-hmm.
else. And we are built for to be the nurturers and the caretakers and all that, and to oversee the household and the people, and all that's it's all good. But now we're feeling depleted and exhausted, and there's still this whole load in front of us that we're having to deal with, as well as sleepless nights and hormones all over the place, and maybe gaining weight we didn't want to gain, and all those things. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we're looking to our partners like, I think it's the emotional help. Like, I need someone to just hold me, and because that can rejuvenate, that gives energy when you
Mm-hmm.
surround that woman who's doing all of that to caretaking with that love and acknowledgement. It's like, okay, you got this. You feel loved. You go out there, you continue. And I think that's sometimes the piece that feels for women like it's missing a little bit at this stage,
Yeah.
especially when that rawness is coming. That filter is gone, the buffering's gone, and she's feeling like she's carrying it by herself.
Yeah. And I think, if I were um, looking back at my own journey and the continuing journey. My wife went into perimenopause 10 years ago, she's still in perimenopause. So unfortunately, she's one of those people who's experiencing an extended period, because we know average is 4 to 10 years. Um, but that doesn't, averages are averages. That's not lived experience. And I think looking back, my solution originally was to take on more of the physical labor. And that's great. That's one area where a man can provide relief. But as I've gone through this and we've developed together a partnership, it's become more and more important to me to take on some of the emotional labor, some of that organization that goes on around a house and the household, and not necessarily the physical labor. Sometimes, if you take on the emotional labor, that frees up space for your partner to carry on with the physical labor. They don't mind, okay, I'm going to still do these things
Mhm.
if you're helping organize these things. And I think, some of those things include children's appointments, doctor's appointments, getting to know the names of school teachers, and pediatricians, and all of those types of things. That's all emotional load. And I think we use that term emotional load without really understanding, or at least for men, understanding what an emotional load is.
Yeah, and it's true. And I mean, men's brains are created different. It's more compartmentalized. So, you're looking at the task in front of you, and you're working towards that. Women's brains are more, what they call like spaghetti. We're all kind of encompassing, looking at the bigger picture. So, having that shift for a man to first seeing and recognizing that emotional load that the woman is carrying.
Mm-hmm.
When we all need a witness to our experience. That's how we feel validated and loved, especially from the people that are closest to us. And so for the man to say, I see you, I'm here. What do you need? Let's do this together. Whatever that sounds like, whatever that language is, that softens the heart. That softens
Mm-hmm.
everything, and it really makes someone feel held. Whether that's a man saying it to a woman or the woman saying it to a man.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. This is the steps towards partnership, and I think one of the other big things, especially around taking on physical or emotional load, that men tend to do, and I know from experience, I did this, is scorekeeping.
Oh, yeah,
So moving away from that scorekeeping approach to relationships.
exactly. And to see the relationship itself as an entity, and so you're both nurturing and adding to the relationship. So there's no keeping score there, or, well, I took out the garbage last week, so it's all good, right? Like, you have to get away from that. um, but really joining and really talking about the relationship and as a separate entity, because we've got two individuals that have needs, and so does the relationship. And so it's stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, and the whole picture can also help as well.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest changes that men notice and feel, because it's a barometer for men in relationships, how healthy is the relationship, is intimacy, whether that's physical or emotional. And if that starts to, as we were talking about, this distance starts to form, obviously intimacy, physical and emotional, declines. And so that for men can be a real change to the relationship, because now this barometer they've always used to say, yes, I have a healthy relationship, that's no longer a barometer. They have to find some other measure.
Right. And that's a big one. That's a big one because, for the woman around intimacy, that starts outside the bedroom. That starts
Mm, yep.
helping with the dishes and helping with cooking, and all of those things all lead to that intimacy. So um, that's kind of that piece of it that, she's feeling distant within herself. she's feeling disconnected within herself, never mind with her partner as well.
Hmm.
The her libido could be dropping due to a drop of testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, everything.
Hmm.
So the need for that form in intimacy isn't at the same as it was. There could be pain associated with that physically.
Hmm.
So a lot of things are changing. Um, and she doesn't want to feel like this is an expectation anymore.
Hmm.
She wants it to be renegotiated because that's an important part of healthy relationships.
Right.
But I can see how the man would think, okay, she's distancing from me. There's something wrong with me, and then taking it on. Like, what am I doing wrong?
Hmm.
This was the sign. This is the point where we connected,
Yeah.
right? Which is an important point. Um, but that now that's also being redefined. It doesn't mean it has to go away at all, but that
Hmm.
it's being redefined.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, it's emotional as well. And I've had conversations with men where they're saying, well, men need to be loved as well. They need to feel loved.
Absolutely.
And that's absolutely true. And that's how they can perceive that. I'm no longer being loved. There's that lack of emotion between us. And I think then it comes to that point where, is this how our relationship's going to be?
Right.
Because they're not having that negotiation, they're not having that conversation around the relationship. Um, I know from personal experience, we didn't talk about things initially. And so I definitely went through that. Is this it? Is this how relationships get? You get to a certain age, a certain stage in the relationship after a certain number of years, and this is it. This is what it's going to look like for the next 30 years.
You become roommates.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big thing that we see a lot with couples is that transition to the roommate scenario,
Yeah.
where there isn't a conversation going on. And the conversations that are going on are logistical.
Mhm.
They're about children's appointments, they're about school, they're about, as you said, things like taking the trash out, um, all of those kinds of logistics that go into running a house, and not what does it take to run a relationship.
That's right. And that intimacy is a important part of that. And so I think, what we need to realize, and I had to learn this too, because I was the avoidant. I was the one who would, let's not talk about this or go there. Um, when that buffer dropped in me, um, that those conversations, like the rawness, the vulnerability, that was a huge one. And I think it's huge for both partners, the
Hmm.
vulnerability.
Hmm.
If we can get there with the raw, real, honest truth, it actually brings us closer.
Yeah.
But I was so afraid of it, because that was not my persona. I was stoic. I was, just barrel through, everything's fine. But then I'm not bringing my true self to a relationship, and the level of honesty and intimacy that was required for that depth of intimacy. So if couples can get there, and that doesn't mean, when I say raw real, it doesn't mean being abusive or, name calling, but to really have those deep, very hard conversations. And it's not easy. It's
Hmm.
like,
No.
right. That can, when you can go to that place and you feel seen by your partner and you see your partner and where they're at, that level of intimacy can be rekindled.
Yeah. And I think, as you said, it's about redefining what intimacy means.
Yes.
Not just the physical aspects, but the emotional. And I think that's something that gets overlooked or not considered is that men do have emotional needs.
Hmm.
And that is part of that intimacy for men. And I think, I was talking the other day on a live, and we talked about spontaneous and receptive personalities within, and we were talking about the physical parts of intimacy,
Mhm.
but I think that also applies to emotional. I think in the past, men may have found that their partner was more spontaneous with things like hugs, with things like compliments,
Right.
and that starts to drift away because she's got so much else going on now. But
Yeah.
now she switches to a receptive form of intimacy. And so the man has to realize that his role is changing to be more spontaneous and look for that receptiveness. And I think that's another change that happens in the relationship, that,
Mhm.
you know, men are looking for, oh, well, she always used to, whatever it is,
Right.
say, do this, and now that's not there.
Yeah, and it can become very like confusing and isolating and lonely when we're still expecting, the woman to behave in that way that, you're used to her being that way, and this is what's always happened. And if we can recognize that, okay, things are shifting now, biologically, emotionally, all of that, and like you say, how can I then initiate? And in the littlest ways, like women, we don't always need the grand gestures. Women really like she's at the sink, come up, give her a hug, or like whatever that looks like, or just you're driving in the car, reaching over, taking her hand. Like it's just the small little things in a day
Hmm. Hmm.
that shows initiative and I love you and I care about you. I see you. That, because women do that automatically. Again, the nurturers and all that. Now we get to a place in perimenopause where we're turning inward. Our energy is turning inward because, that is the buffer is dropping and we're trying to sort out what is going on with ourselves. And so there's a pulling in.
Hmm.
And the husband then can take that as, oh, she's withdrawing from me. What's going on? What have I done?
Hmm.
And I think, yeah, shifting that emotional weight, redefining it a little bit of, to be that the one that, you know what, let me, draw you a bubble bath. Let me, whatever that is. And, it really does make a difference.
Hmm. And I think there's also those, and you listed some of them, the practical elements for a
Mm.
man in once that language starts to appear. So now we have the language of perimenopause, and men love lists, So now a man can start to accumulate data, and a lot of men love to have data. They love to have tangibles. Now I've got a list of 100 symptoms, and I've gone out and I've done my research, and this is great. Now I can fix it. This is the practical things I can do. I can understand this. So now there must be a solution to it, and I can provide that solution. And it's transforming that into more practical things. Like if your partner has hot flashes, understanding that they might not want to be hugged in the middle of a hot flash,
Right.
recognizing that. I'm a yoga teacher. My wife has, and I teach a class in the morning. My wife has hot flashes in the morning. I know not to invite her to a yoga class. This is not going to be comfortable for her in a room full of other people having a hot flash while while she's trying to do yoga.
Right.
It's not going to work. An evening class, yes, she doesn't have hot flashes in the evenings. So it's things like that, understanding that you can do things. They are practical things you can do, but they have to be timed as well. Um, and I think that's important as well. Recognizing, yes, there's things I can do, but also when do I do them?
Yes, timing is very important to understand the woman's rhythm in her
Hmm.
daily life, what's going on, and assisting where you can. And the other piece of that is also, um, who do I need to become? because the man is being transformed too, whether he
Hmm.
realizes it or not.
Mm.
In a good way, in a, we're always evolving, right? We're all learning, growing. So, who is the partner that I need to become in
Yes.
this? And not only the partner, like I'm not gonna say better person, but to just grow in your own personal development, to be in a new way, to expand your own consciousness as
Hmm.
well. So, who am I bringing into the relationship now, and how do I need to transform personally and for the relationship?
Yeah, and I think that's we talk about midlife and midlife changes. And men, as you pointed out, men are going through midlife changes. Work environment may well be changing. Maybe they have achieved a certain level, and now they may be realizing that's where there's as far as they're going to go. And ambition is exceeding reality, and other people are coming up behind them. Maybe they have new perspectives, new talents, new technology, the practical things that men are facing, that we all face as we age out of things like, hey, AI is now the thing. Okay, now that's something else I've got to learn. Just when I thought I had my arms around things that I needed to learn. And then the physical aspects of aging. Men start to look in the shaving mirror, and that's not the 30-year-old face that they're used to. Maybe the body starts to soften around the middle. Maybe you start making noises when you stand up that you never used to make. And all of this is starting that realization of I am changing, I need to evolve. Before we even get to emotional evolvement, and before we start to, like you said, look at who do I need to be now? Who am I going to be now? Because we're getting into midlife. Who am I in midlife now? And that's it, never mind who am I in this relationship, but who am I in midlife? What
Right.
does that look like for me as a man? What am I experiencing? What is going to change? What do I need to do to be a midlife man
Mhm.
as opposed to a younger man?
Yeah. Yeah. It all plays on the psyche. It's all happening in there. And so the man is feeling this way at this point in his life. And so that's swirling around inside of him. And then all of a sudden, a corner is turned, and his partner is now flying off the rails. It's like, oh, what's happening here? Like, it's a lot, and it's a lot that's really not talked about and acknowledged. That each person really is going through their own experience. And we are also live in a society where you reach the middle age point and now beyond, and now it's all about decline.
Hmm.
And in the wisdom traditions, at this point in our lives, we have lived enough, loved enough, lost enough, experienced enough that we're actually entering into our wisdom years. But there's no ceremony for that. There's no acknowledging of
Hmm.
that. In this society, it's all about the diminishment, the decline. And that's also in our psyches that we're
Yeah.
also grappling with.
Hmm.
And so, we want to feel in our partnerships that sacred feeling of like, I've got you, we're in this together kind of feeling. But each person is swirling in their own metamorphosis, for lack of a better word.
Hmm. Yeah. No, and I think you're right. It is that decline piece that it gets to both of the men and the women. But I think men particularly start to feel that identity shift outside, externally. There's an identity shift. They're not the person they used to be. Society's expectations of them is for them to step back, to let the new generation in, and men will sometimes grip hold of their existing role and not want to age. And like I said, we were talking about at the beginning, when a woman enters perimenopause, that's a marker
Mhm.
for both of them.
Yeah.
We are now in midlife. We are now officially aging. And like you said, there's no ritual, but there are markers.
Definitely, definitely. And for the woman as well. I mean, I know, you were talking about, men at midlife, you're taking a step back, or you or feel you need to take a step back. As far as the woman, as well, as she ages, women become more invisible. You see that
Mm,
in roles in the movie. The older woman becomes the grandmother all of a sudden. She becomes the funny comedian or whatever. Like, um, the beauty is viewed differently. The beauty of youth and all that. And so women are also at this stage feeling more invisible, and that they're needing to step back, even within families. I've even noticed it in my own family where, oh, it's just Nana being Nana. Like, it's like, no, like, I'm a person and I've lived through so much experience and I have wisdom I want to share. And like, yeah, which
yeah,
is great. So, I think both men and women experience that invisibility in their own way at this time of life.
yeah. And I think, like we've just been saying, that how that affects the dynamic within the relationship.
Yes.
If both partners are experiencing this change of expectations within them, and we talked about the sandwich generation, um, that changing expectations, those changing roles, that's a perfect storm in any relationship where the woman's role is changing and she feels that role is changing.
Mhm.
The man feels his role is changing. And so they're both experiencing, as you said, metamorphosis. And I think that's where that tension comes from, and the recognition of the cracks
Mhm.
that perhaps already existed, perhaps new ones form under strain. And I think that's sometimes where relationships can fail.
Yeah, because if there's not a willingness to look at it, or a willingness to change, if we're trying so hard with all our energy to keep things the same when they're not the same anymore, they are moving, things are shifting. You know, we need to have that willingness to accept that we are in a huge change, and to work with it, and that the cracks are showing up for a reason. And it doesn't mean it makes your life wrong, or that you made wrong choices. It's that there's more of a truth coming forward now that needs to be looked at and lived. What you choose to do with that, you know,
Mhm.
you need both partners to be willing to move through. If they're not, the relationship tends to break apart. But
Mm.
if you're willing to look at those cracks and go, okay, how did we get here? What can we do about this? Where do we have flexibility? Lots of conversation and honest conversation. Um, it has a chance. You can take this time and you can shift with it in a very positive direction. Some couples, go through this and they decide, we can't. We're too far apart. you know, if that's the truth, then that's the truth. And to honor that truth. Um, and for those that want to work on it, like, okay, we both have the willingness, let's do what we need to do and move through this. Excellent. Excellent. There's no guaranteed outcome, as there's no guarantees in life, right?
Right. And I saw this conversation happening on Substack a little while ago. As I change, will you still choose me?
Mm,
And I think that applies to the interpersonal, but I think it also applies to the personal. As I change, will I still choose me?
right.
And I think that's where you're talking about, is that that active decision that you make to choose yourself first, and you choose your partner, and you decide, yes, I'm going to choose this new person, this person who is changing, And as they change, I'm going to keep choosing them.
Mm-hmm. Really important piece because, from the woman's perspective, we give. We're the nurturers, the givers, we create homes and lives, and um, sometimes at the expense of ourselves. But there's a willingness with children and all that. We do all that.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. That's kind of that role as we live the first half of our lives. There's now a shift within ourselves that um, is requiring us to go inwards and to choose ourselves and the truth of who we are. And so we're starting to put the truth of who we are out there and choosing ourselves over and above, not in a selfish way, or a self centered way, but because for any relationship to be healthy, you need to bring the truth of who you are to that relationship in
Mm-hmm.
both male and female.
Yeah.
And so, always, for the man as well, choosing the truth of who he is. Okay, can we coexist? Can we work through with the truth of who we are now?
Yeah. So if you were going to sum up, and I know you have in some of your posts that I've read, if there's one thing that you would say for men to hear, what would it be?
I feel it would be that this is not happening to her, this is happening through her. And what's
Mm,
happening through her is an invitation to transform for both of you and for the relationship.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, transferring. So I'm going to open it and see if anybody has questions in the chat before we close out.
Okay.
So if any of you, thank you all for joining. If any of you have questions for either of us, please put them in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. We'll give it a minute for people to,
Okay.
and don't be shy. Okay, I don't think we have any questions. I think I think you did a great job of answering all their questions.
You too.
So, Linda, where can people find you?
I'm on Substack at RiseWise Substack, and my website is lindarosecooper.com. And I will be having a book come out very soon, which is When Everything Changes, the Midlife Collision of Body and Life.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Thank you.
And for me, you can find me as Simon Salt, The Quiet Transition on Substack. Linda, thank you very much for a great conversation.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone, for joining, and we will see you soon.